Welcome to the Champs App podcast, where we help players and parents demystify the world of minor hockey development and recruiting for both girls and boys. On this episode, we talk with Mare MacDougall Bari, the assistant coach with the St. Lawrence University Saints women's hockey team. We talk about her long tenure in coaching at SLU, the new hockey facilities at St. Lawrence, and going into detail about how she recruits at various girls' hockey events. I really enjoyed this conversation with Mare, and I hope you do too. Before we get to our guest, if you enjoyed this episode and want us to keep making more of them, please share it with teammates and friends. You can also subscribe, like, follow, and even better, it would be great if you would leave us a review. Now, let's drop the puck and get to the show. I'm very excited to have on the Champs App podcast, Mare MacDougall Bari, who is the assistant women's hockey coach at St. Lawrence University, originally from Lumsden, Saskatchewan, which is just northwest of Regina. She played at Mercyhurst College, where she helped the Lakers capture back-to-back league championships before starting her coaching career at Wayne State University, where she was for 4 years. For the past 14 seasons, she's been an assistant coach at St. Lawrence University, winning the National Women's Assistant Coach Award in 2020. Welcome to the podcast, Mare.
Thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, so happy to have you on the podcast. Why don't we start out like we do all our guests, telling us a little bit about your hockey history in Lumsden, Saskatchewan?
Yeah. So I will say it's probably, again, a product. We were just talking a little bit off camera about, I'm a product of my generation, my age with regards to hockey, college hockey, certainly, but women's hockey, kind of being in those formative years as I was coming up. I would say that my hockey experience was a mixed bag between a game called ringette and hockey, where, we, to have access and I guess to playing sport with other females, ringette was far more popular and accessible. And it's one of the things I love the most about the way that the game has grown, is the way that young women, get the social and the athletic at the elite level now. And again, nothing to say of my wonderful guy friends that I grew up, playing and practicing hockey with, but that's a really nice transition that's been able to happen because of some wonderful, advancements in the game. So growing up, on a farm outside of Lumsden, Saskatchewan, certainly my biggest influences were, people from town. My father, had played hockey. He won a Memorial Cup championship in 1974 with the Regina Pats. And so my love of hockey started very early, watching his love of hockey, both in coaching it, all the way up. He had a love of coaching the minor league team or minor hockey in Lumsden. And I would say more than even just my love of playing the game, my love of coaching came from watching, people who really loved coaching hockey. It wasn't one of those things, and certainly the game has progressed, but some of my best coaches were unpaid volunteers who just had a knack for being around young people and who loved the game, as opposed to, an elite prospect team per se, where you're making a living out of it. I learned so much of my intuitive or player forward coaching from the coaches that I had growing up, both in ringette and in hockey, because they were volunteers. So I have a real affinity for that. And I will say that my love of student athletes who start their career playing for their town or representing their town and end it playing for that same town is high. That's always something that I hold near and dear in conversations with prospective student athletes when they've been representing where they're from for their, their entire careers, instead of, maybe bouncing around chasing, let's say, a national championship or a scholarship per se.
When did you first put on skates, and were they hockey skates or were they figure skates? Okay, yeah.
No, yeah, and never knew. I mean, it's laughable when I get like new coaching skates here. I'm just like, excuse me, I never had new skates once. I actually wore these completely awful green pants. A former player of my dad's had been connected to the Hartford Whalers farm system. And so we wore whatever was kicking around. And this former player of my dad's was like, hey, here's some stuff. And I was like known for wearing these terrible green pants because they were free and accessible, and I didn't care.
Well, they couldn't be that terrible because, the Saskatchewan Rough Riders, are known as the Green Riders. And so green is actually pretty popular in Saskatchewan, right? So
sure.
It couldn't have been that awful or stand out that much where you were from, right?
Yeah. Interestingly enough, you know, it was just a matter of like passing items on and along. And again, in farming communities in Saskatchewan, you know, you're wearing what someone else has worn. You know, the hockey swap culture is real. And so I will say that was always a connection that we had.
So you mentioned you played ringette. When did you start playing hockey, and were you playing with boys or girls, or were you just playing with the ringette, and then did you transition to hockey, you know, separately? Tell us about how those two interacted.
Yeah, I was playing both. And again, I was lucky because right at the very end, right in my high school years, there were enough girls in Regina to have a team. And again, it was a mixed bag of young women that were taking hockey very seriously and others who wanted to do it for social reasons. And some of my very best and closest friends to this day are women that I met, you know, at that time, young girls that I met, you know, kind of in those formative years of hockey. And so again, that idea of truly being a coach to all, or a player on a team where maybe you will walk into that locker room and the only thing you have in common is hockey, right? I think to women's hockey, that's so much more common because we have athletes that are just exceptionally great athletes and don't have to necessarily have that level of commitment. You have people that are there totally for the social, and that's completely fine too. I feel like sometimes the three coaches at St. Lawrence, you know, if the social adage wasn't there, we might not all be in coaching still, or certainly coaching together here at St. Lawrence. But so that was that connection that I loved the game more. And I did grow up on a farm with, you know, brothers and a sister that were, you know, there was a physical allowance in the game of ringette that wasn't there. So hockey was more for me and the way that I as an athlete functioned and how I was, you know, raised. So I would say that kind of became the switch. And then just certainly, and it's one of the things I like the least about our beautiful sport is just that financial aspect. You know, my parents had 4 children. You know, there was going to have to be a moment where we're going to do one, but not all 17 sports that you love and are good at. And again, it's one of the things that I'm most thankful for the way that I was raised was those kind of like that house league adage for all sports. For, you know, you could play softball and, you know, box, lacrosse and soccer and hockey and ringette and find a way, and somebody's parent would drive you from one to the other because their kids were doing the same, you know? And so again, I really feel like my roots of loving sports, like, you know, my husband and I woke up this morning at 4 a.m. to watch the US women's national team soccer play because heaven forbid we miss a game, you know? And I think that love of sport all the way around. We were watching the surfing quarterfinals last night and I was like, I've got to learn more about the sport of surfing, you know? Because sport as a whole is just something that was so formative for me. And I don't think if I had been a single sport athlete, or if I had been, you know, plucked at the age of 7 into an elite program, that I would have had that same love or that level of competitiveness that came from my family, no doubt. But I would say that that's part of who I am, you know, as a competitor is understanding all those different sports and what it was to want to be really good at all of them, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. So aside from the rink fries, what's your favorite youth hockey memory?
Oh my gosh. Besides the rink fries? Oh, yeah. I'm gonna match that up. No, I'm kidding. That's funny. So I would say Notre Dame, that, you know, the prep school in Wilcox always had like my heart. I begged my parents to let me, you know, go and play there. And, you know, now that
for folks who are listening, who are in the US, it's Notre Dame in Saskatchewan, where Rob Brendamore went to school. It is not Notre Dame University. So just so we're clear. The Hounds of Notre Dame. So I will say that my first opportunity to go to a Team Saskatchewan, so what was called Mercyhurst at the time, tryout, and to stay in the dorms at Notre Dame and really be in this opportunity with other, you know, kind of hockey junkie young women, that memory sticks out for me, that opportunity to be around other elite female athletes, but also, you know, that opportunity to be at a you know, a campus or at a place that really felt kind of like hockey hallowed ground. If you grew up in Saskatchewan, you know, and again, with coming from a hockey loving family, we would drive to Notre Dame just to watch junior hockey games. You know, we might know somebody off the team from our hometown, or, you know, somebody that my dad had played with, his son might be playing.
So I had been going and you know, to Notre Dame throughout my life, and to go to that first hockey camp and be around other elite, you know, female hockey players, that is something that really stands out to me. And it's something that, you know, when our prospective student athletes, committed student athletes, or current student athletes are going to Hockey Canada camps right now, and it's that moment where, you know, you take that deep breath and like, don't forget to have fun. You know, you're competing, you're trying to make the team, and I completely understand, you know, the stress that is involved in that, right? And the pressure that we put on ourselves to do that, but don't forget to have fun, because those are things, you know, there are memories made, and you know, in those hallways, those dark nights when the lights go out and you're, you know, rapping with your friend down the hallway. That's a really special time for, I think, for formulating this importance of team in our life. And it's one of the biggest reasons, you know, why I feel like I've stayed in college hockey for as long as I have, that, you know, that element of team and community doesn't transcend to a lot of other industries in the same way that it does when you stay with and in the game. So yeah, shout out to Notre Dame and all the wonderful years of memories that they've given so many Saskatchewan hockey players by putting on hockey camps there, for sure.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right, so now let's transition into how you ended up at Mercyhurst and why you only played 2 years there.
Yeah, so I had been training at the Olympic Oval program in Calgary, Alberta. Again, felt like that was a wonderful move for me in my formative years. Had some really great opportunities under Wally Kozak to grow as a person and a player. And he is kind of a, you know, a son of Saskatchewan, always really embraced, you know, who I was as a person and a player, and certainly the person more than the player. You know, it came to a point where I knew I wasn't going to be at that level, you know, competing to be going to the Olympics. But I still felt like I could contribute as a defenseman and play the game I love. So after being at the Oval for 4 years and really learning how to be on my own a little bit, right? Had some great experiences, some wonderful, my roommate at the University of Calgary, Kathy Devereaux, ended up going to the University of Wisconsin, but I was in an elite training environment. So it wasn't necessarily about your teammates. Everybody there was trying to embrace the opportunity to get better, to go to the next level. And so my time at Mercyhurst became really special to me because the young women that I transitioned into their class, so you know, showing up as a junior, they were the first class of women's hockey players at Mercyhurst. So their, you know, their love of Mercyhurst hockey and their connection as a team was so close. That was really something that I loved and embraced when I showed up at Mercyhurst, and you know, they welcomed me, but you know, I had those 2 great years to really contribute to a program which took off very shortly after, you know, with some obvious big name recruits, someone like Megan Augusta just came in and changed the complete landscape. I mean, the university, it's a university now, not college. So I always laughed that I was like, oh, it was so cute when we were there. It was a college, now it's a university. But it's something I take a lot of pride in, knowing that culture wise, that you know, I was a part of this awesome group of young women that really set the stage for that program to transition very quickly to such a national powerhouse.
And right, you immediately transitioned into coaching at Wayne State University upon graduation. Yeah. So how did that happen? That's rather unique.
Yeah, Jim Fetter, who was my assistant coach at Mercyhurst. So Jim had recruited me, and it's so funny that now that I've been in the game long enough, I always kind of, I guess, compare people to who Jim was at the time, right? Definitely a player's coach, but he was a recruiting machine. He loved to recruit. He loved to be on the road with his colleagues. He loved finding, you know, prospective student athletes to bring to Mercyhurst that were both, you know, talented young hockey players, but also great people. And so Jim and I had a bond kind of immediately when I was there as a player. And he got the head coaching job at Wayne State upon my graduation. Okay. And so I had expressed to him an interest to stay in the game, didn't really know, didn't feel like I was, you know, ready, didn't know if I was going to go to Europe, you know, just wanted to keep one foot in the game as much as I could. And he gave me this wonderful opportunity, which is like an absolute, it's an embarrassment of riches. It doesn't happen, you know, this way anymore, right? There is that concept of paying your dues and going and getting some experience. So I go to Wayne State, I'm younger than 3 of my players, you know, that I'm coaching at the time. My fellow assistant there, Grant Kimball, who was also hired by Jim. So we were together as a staff for 4 years, also extremely instrumental. Grant's now at Yale University, but just a wonderful mentor for me as I was growing up as a person. You know, really taught me the ropes as far as professionalism. And I think he really embraced, you know, my passion for the sport and for college hockey, and helped me refine some of the things that every, you know, 22-year-old needs to get perspective on if they want to be in coaching for the long run, right? I stayed inquisitive. I asked a ton of questions, but I also was allowed to stay, you know, as I always had wanted to be, a quote unquote players coach, right? My love of coaching comes from the energy and experience that I get in working with student athletes. So because Grant loved recruiting so much, in the same way that Jim had loved recruiting so much, I was able to be really present with the team in my 4 years at Wayne State, as opposed to maybe having a recruiting team per se. You know, he loved being the recruiting coordinator, still does, out on the road. The relationships were all, you know, based on him. We were going and kind of, you know, we were the cleanup pitchers. That's what I felt like, right? Like coming in to really try to get, you know, help prospective student athletes get an understanding of what the program had to offer them, what the university had to offer them, what the community had to offer them, because I was living that day to day a lot more than, say, Grant was, who was on the road so much. Yeah. And that model, you know, again, I fell into, you know, the same situation at St. Lawrence, in that Ted Wisner is, you know, a recruiting coordinator. He is the last of the great road warriors, right? He is happiest when he is in a rink with the smell of rink fries, you know, talking to hockey people, watching hockey players. And so it's given me an opportunity to, like I said, be present and build up my career as what I would call a player's coach, or at the very least, making sure that my coaching philosophy is always student athlete centered.
How did you end up at St. Lawrence University? And we'll get into the school in a moment. Yeah. I'm just curious how you made the transition from Wayne State, because that
guy Ted that I was just talking about. Circumstances happen. The former assistant coach Jody was coming off of her presence with the U.S. Olympic team, and she took a head coaching job at Wesleyan University, and so there was an opening at St. Lawrence. And so due to reputation, due to, you know, my relationship with Grant as my, you know, fellow assistant, and our really nice tandem that we had, and then his relationship with Ted on the road, so much of when people are looking for staff, it comes down to, or it should come down to, yes, their credentials, but also the chemistry that you can have as a coaching staff. And Ted and I had always, you know, connected. He's a small town, hearted person. You know, he really loves people. And so he always, while, you know, watching prospective student athletes, you know, I would go toe for toe with anyone who thinks that they're a better evaluator. He always made the time for people, including me, a young assistant who had questions. Hey, what are you doing over there? What are you watching? Who are you watching? What do you think about this player? Always took the time to have some great, you know, conversations with me. I thought I was, you know, learning from him, but I think at that point, you know, whether you know it or not, you're auditioning for your next job at times. Yeah. So I had started my PhD program at Wayne State. I was balancing academics and athletics at the time. And so when the opportunity to come work for Paul Flanagan at St. Lawrence, you know, came to fruition, I decided to put my PhD on hold. It's still sitting there on hold, and just pursue my career in hockey and see where it took me. You know, I always felt like I could pick up the academic piece. It's something I'm passionate about. I teach at St. Lawrence, so I've been able to, at the very least, stay connected to that really important part of the student athlete experience, the actual academics. But you know, decided to pursue my heart in hockey, and it certainly has led me to what I would describe as kind of, you know, the right place, my second home for sure.
Yeah, well, 14 years is a long time. So let's talk about St. Lawrence University. So the student body is about 2,500 students. I think that's what it was maybe before COVID. I don't know what it is these days. It's based in Canton, New York, not Canton, Ohio, which is a village in New York State, not a city, not a town. It's a village, according to Wikipedia. And you have some pretty famous alumni, at least on the men's side, like Bill Torrey, Brian McFarland, the famous broadcaster. Here where I live in the Bay Area, Jamie Baker, the former broadcaster in San Jose Shark, and the play-by-play announcer, Dan Ruzanowski. So I was actually pretty amazed at how many alumni that I was familiar with. And Bob McKenzie actually spoke about the school because his son, in his book, his son went to St. Lawrence University. But we do have a previous guest who's from St. Lawrence University, Ellie Williams, who is the 16U head coach at Shattuck St. Mary's. So were you involved with recruiting her and coaching her? And if it was, tell us what that was like.
I'm going to Ellie's wedding next weekend. So
so I guess the answer would be yes.
You know what? Again, these are the things that happen. Ellie had another school that was her top choice, and academically it didn't end up being a fit for her. And Ted had built such a great relationship with her and her family that we were the runner-up, and I think it was the absolute perfect fit for her in the long run. You know, she's certainly a memorable student athlete. You don't get to coach many kids from Oklahoma whose parents are, pecan farmers, right? But I will say that, she is probably one of the individuals that keeps the recruiting process as healthy for me as possible, because there's a school out there for everyone. And if you do the process, quote unquote, right, or in my opinion, healthily, and you leave the door open for student athletes, it can't just be all the school wanting that prospective student athlete or all the prospective student athlete wanting the school. Sometimes there's a healthy mix, and there's always these interesting variables, especially now in the COVID era, that might land people at your institution that, you didn't know that we're going to come here, but we're probably meant to be here. And she always said would be one of them. Her leadership style was perfect for the team that we had when she showed up. And
yeah, I want to ask you about that. So one of the things that we talked about on the podcast with her was her leadership and her being one of the captains of the team. So what made her such a great leader?
You know what? There was a great mix within that class. So they had a big class. So there's interesting dynamics that come from, being in a class of 10, versus a class of 3, right? So Ellie's personality, she is assertive, she's smart, she, probably has a little Southern sass, as I like to call it. She's going to get in, she's going to have the hard conversations when they need to be had. But the more I watch her grow as a coach at Shattuck, I also see her being having a real cue of perceptiveness, where she knows how to go about those conversations now, even better than she did as a student athlete, which is how it should happen. But the other leaders on the team at the time had a completely opposite leadership style of her. So they really balanced each other out, in a really great way that you often need somebody who's going to give it to you, straight up, or hold you really accountable to your behavior. But sometimes you need that super fun captain that's just like, hey, I'm just going to go out and lead by example, and probably be just as much of a hot mess as you are, and we'll all get through it together. That was her class. That was her, that leadership group, where Ellie's attention to detail and assertiveness really came through. And I mean, again, she's like, 5'1", 100 pounds, soaking wet, and she comes through like a bull in a china shop when she has something to say. It was a perfect mix for our team, and certainly for the kind of captains that our head coach Chris Wells likes to work with, right? Opinions are good. We are not yes people here. So she was a really wonderful addition to that particular team, and really contributed in a lot of ways to our success during her time here, and still now.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. So now let's talk a little bit about the facilities. In particular, you have one of the best barns in college hockey, Appleton Arena. It went through a $17 million renovation in 2019. But it also, you preserved the wooden bleachers And I believe you have a siren that goes off every time you guys score. So maybe just tell us what the atmosphere is like and what it's like to play in Appleton Arena, because it is a true treasure in college hockey.
It is so funny. When I played at Wayne State or played at Mercyhurst, I had a chance to play in Appleton. When I coached at Wayne State, I had a chance to coach in Appleton. And I remember walking in for my interview and, just pinching myself, like, what the heck? This is the dream rink of anyone that grew up in Lumsden, Saskatchewan. That's how I felt. Like, you could feel the history, you could feel the love, really, you could feel the love for Saints hockey. And so I don't take it for granted, walking into that rink on a daily basis, like to call it home, is a real statement. It's not just a place where I work or a place where I coach or a place where our student athletes play ice hockey. It really is the first thing our student athletes come back to. It's the first thing that my family, my parents want to come and see when they, come and visit, aside from the dog and my husband. Appleton really is the heartbeat of the St. Lawrence community. So in the renovation, knowing that, there is this moment in time that we're at where training athletes as elite athletes as a part of their student athletic experience is really important to them, right? And I think that providing them with the facilities to do that is important as well. And so to have our new strength and conditioning room, more than probably any of the other renovated spaces, just allows us to provide our student athletes with the experience that we want to, first as people, then as students, then as athletes. So when they walk in Appleton Arena, they are Division I athletes, because everywhere else on campus, as the only Division I athletes on campus, we want them to be people and students first. And so the renovation, I think, really allows our student athletes to do that without making any sort of compromise, right? They're choosing St. Lawrence for the right reasons for them, first as people, then as students, and then as athletes. And certainly facilities, I think, allow us to do that now.
Let's talk about the coaching staff. The one thing which really struck me when I was researching for our conversation was you basically have the most seasoned, experienced staff that I've seen. Usually there is one or two, very well experienced coaches on the staff, and then there's a third really young one, maybe fresh, recently out of college. But you have 3 coaches who've all been there 10 plus years, all working together. Chris Wells, the head coach, Ted Boomer was there, as we talked about before on the recruiting side, and yourself. What's it like? Tell us about the coaching staff and how you guys work together as a team. And you also have a strength and conditioning coach, which means that you're no longer the strength and conditioning coach as you have been in the past. So
this is my first, I just completed my first season moving away from that responsibility, which I will say was, Jared Hatz, our strength and conditioning coach, is a wonderful person in addition to the staff. So that was easier than it probably would have been. That was kind of the place where I based a lot of my relationship building out of. We have this new multi-million-dollar facility, and in the past we had what we called the garage or the dungeon or the tin can, and we made no excuses. We got what we needed to get done with what we had, and that underdog mentality is something I think we carry with us. There's been a lot of success with St. Lawrence hockey. So some people would be like, underdog, really? But I think it's more, what we have is something we hold dear. And, with regards to relationships first in our program, we collect people, not things. And so it was always a real source of pride when we could see the work that the girls were putting in without the bells and whistles. Now we have the bells and whistles, they're still putting the work in. And so we have to find different ways to kind of redefine who we are, what we're doing, how we're doing it. So it's been I think we're very fortunate to have a long tenured coaching staff, so that culture, the threads that are most important to who we are as a program have been able to stay consistent, because the 3 people, certainly the head coach that's most responsible for it, and then Ted and I, who have I think complemented that leadership style of Chris for so long. They're childhood friends, Chris and Ted,
really? Okay,
in Canton.
Yeah.
So I'm the outsider, which now feels strange after all of this time, right? That I'm not a local, but I am now. So there's a lot of ways in which we've been able to navigate the strengths of each of us. Ted was, you can just feel the love of you know, the town of Canton and growing up in and around Appleton. Chris was a captain of the men's team, coached, you know, left after graduating, came back, was coaching with his mentor and head coach Joe Marsh for a number of years. And then when Paul Flanagan left, you know, funny enough that he was both Ted and Chris's high school coaching in Canton. You know, the connections are many. You know, and Chris at the time had a young family, and really made that decision that he was interested in connecting with the women's side of the game. And since coming over, I think has become a real standard bearer in the ECAC for, you know, team culture and providing our student athletes with a really healthy opportunity to be people students and elite athletes. So, gotcha. You know, for Ted and I, it's easy in that, you know, we really trust Chris's vision. He's innovative, he's charismatic, he's creative. So sometimes we have to be the steady eddies, you know, behind the scenes, crossing the T's and dotting the I's so that Chris can do what he does best. And I think that we've complemented each other so well that way. And, you know, for a long time, Ted and I shared an office, you know, no bigger than my living room. And Chris had a card table because he, you know, in the corner of it, he had this big, beautiful office, like overlooking campus upstairs. And he never wanted to miss the banter or the exchange or a player walking past the office. And so the three of us really shared a space and time and oxygen. And I think that's where some of our best moments as a coach and why, you know, that closeness continues, because we put in that work right there with each other on a daily basis.
And that continuity must show in, you know, year to year as the program goes from transitions through players, but the consistency is always there.
Yeah, consistency, but not complacency, right? Like there's a huge difference. We want to grow. We want to provide our student athletes with the best experience possible. And you can't do that resting on your laurels. You know, again, the hard work, dedication, commitment to St. Lawrence hockey, you know, working with two men who grew up in the community that, you know, bleeds scarlet and brown, that was easy to pick up. Now it's how can we continue to press forward, move laterally a little, pick up some things here or there. And maybe COVID was that perfect reset for a lot of coaches that have been at their institutions for a long time or been working together for a long time. Not that I ever felt like I took it for granted, but I will, you know, after this experience again of being separated from my family, my true family, but this being my St. Lawrence family, you know, the idea that we weren't going to get to coach together this year, I think is a wonderful reset and re-energize us really to not take for granted how lucky we are to be here and together.
Right. So let's transition into the team stuff. So first thing that I noticed when I looked at your roster from last season was more than half your team are Canadians. So is that part of your strategy is to target, you know, Canadians, or it just works out that way?
Yeah. When you say strategy, like it's not that we're not purposeful people, but St. Lawrence is what it is. And this is something I really believe. Like we're a small school in a small town with proximity to the Canadian border. So to reinvent the wheel and talk about, you know, who ends up coming here to be a Saint, you know, there are some ties that bind, right? And this year was really hard because a lot of our Canadian student athletes chose St. Lawrence partially because they come from tight-knit families who wanted to experience their college careers, right? So no, they're, you know, not their mom's coming down and folding their laundry on a Wednesday night, but here for most home weekends, get to know the other players, get to know the coaching staff, get to know the parents. Really, I think it's a reward for all the hard work that raising hockey players is, right? These hockey parents want to enjoy being a part of their student athlete experience, their student athletes experience, pardon me. And this year it was drop them off at the border and sending them to college, you know? So in a lot of ways, we kind of were each other's pseudo family that way. But I think because of the type of place that St. Lawrence is, where relationships, and that's not just at Appleton Arena, that's with your professors, that's in your dorms, the way that St. Lawrence is as a residential campus with small class sizes, you know, with PhDs teaching your classes as opposed to, you know, TAs or, you know, a lot of adjunct professors. It's a tight-knit community. And so we end up with a lot of student athletes from, you know, the greater Toronto area or, you know, just down the 401 because they are looking for that to still stay connected to home, but also to find a new home. And so, you know, the jealousy, you know, Saskatchewan green with envy, right? Because my family never got to have that experience. My brother played college hockey in Buffalo. I play in Erie, Pennsylvania. You know, for parents to be able to hop across the border, you know, with a fresh batch of cookies to watch a Friday night game, I've always been extremely envious of, but very happy that's, you know, that duplicity, that they're gaining their independence as young women, but they're also able to keep those ties that bind. And that is so growing up in Saskatchewan. So I will say that has a lot to do with that connectivity. And certainly has been important to us. And then we have some, you know, some one-offs, like we've got kids from North Dakota, and, you know, we had a nice little run with some student athletes from California, you know, and so whatever it is they're looking for, as long as they're true to the fact that St. Lawrence can't be, you know, a Big Ten school in its approach to athletics, in its facilities, in its experience right down to the dorm living residential campus. We've just done really well with student athletes who knew that this was what they were looking for, that small liberal arts college with a hockey program that cares about them as people and as athletes. And then we just play in a really wonderful competitive league. So kids know.
So let's get into that. So you guys play in the ECAC, which is an incredibly tough division, conference, excuse me. Includes all the Ivy Leagues, plus like Clarkson and Colgate and Quinnipiac. So it's before you even start, you know, you got 10 competitive teams fielding great teams every year. You know, talk about that in general, about playing in the ACAC, and then let's just talk about this last season where there were just 4 teams playing, and some of the success that you had last year playing against 3 of the top teams in the country.
So it's interesting because with you know, a 12-team league where you're, I feel like each school has some sort of connectivity to each other, but they're all different. So, you know, to say these 6 Ivy League institutions, they're all so different from each other. They've got this common, you know, thread. Even ourselves in Clarkson, right? If you're thinking about North Country schools, small school, small town, you know, they're more engineering and tech geared, we're liberal arts. So like there are differences throughout. And again, I love that about our league, that every night I feel like we're playing a bunch of young women that are super passionate to play for the program that they're playing for, that they chose that school, again, for the right reasons, right? You know, as a lot of moving parts instead of just one reason. And so you're never getting away with a quote unquote easy win. You're never playing a team that is going to roll over because St. Lawrence walking into the rink, right? And neither are we. You know, we're not going to roll over because, you know, these teams with this, you know, national academic recognition are rolling into town, or they've got this many national team players this year. Oh my goodness. No, instead it's like, they've got this many national team players. We'll see. Welcome to Appleton. So I love, we've got travel partners, which is super unique, right? So we're playing a different team on Friday than we do on Saturday. Most years. This year was obviously in COVID was not the case, but it's this really awesome opportunity to build a competitive nature with every team in the league. You can't take a night off. It doesn't matter what the Friday result was. You got to get up, turn around, and get ready for a new opponent on Saturday. And I think that really adds to the way that the league plays out. A lot of our players did play against each other. You know, there is a distinct, you know, trend of, you know, kids from New England or, you know, kids from Canada, certainly that pocket in the PWHL. And so that competitiveness continues. You know, it is funny, the conversations in the locker room that happen about like who played who in the Stony Creek tournament final and how, you know, somebody got this penalty and it was a terrible call. And I'm just like, that was 4 years ago, you know, but I appreciate that as a very competitive person who, you know, remembers things like that as well. But the league itself, just top to bottom, we've really, I think, come into a time where, you know, every night our kids need to step up and perform, and they want that. They want that opportunity. They know that their, you know, college experiences are limited, and as elite women's hockey players, you know, what's next? And hopefully that won't be the conversation at some point, but for a lot of our student athletes, this is the pinnacle of their competitive hockey careers. And so they work hard all week, and, you know, in the fall and through the spring, and for us in the summer semester this year, to have that opportunity to wear the scarlet and brown on the weekend. And I really feel like the way that the league is structured and the amount of quality teams that we have top to bottom, you know, really brings out the best in our student athletes.
Right, and let's just talk about as we transition from a COVID year to upcoming, hopefully a non-COVID year, if things play out nicely. So last year, I believe you guys played 13 games, and if you drop that rushed first game against Clarkson, which you know you played a little bit before you expected to play, I believe, you know, you're basically 500 against some of the really top teams. What was it like, you know, playing in those games this past season?
Yeah, I think it really, from our coaching staff point of view, really taught us what our team's about. You know, to lose 8-1 to Clarkson on a Wednesday night, and to turn around and play Colgate, who were just very, they had used their first COVID semester extremely well. They're a very, very well coached team. You know, did a ton of skill development. You could just feel them as a cohesive unit. To come back and essentially tie them, you know, lose 2 games in overtime. That was sheer grit. That was determination. That's not happening. That was embarrassing. And we're back. And that wasn't a conversation that needed to be led by the coaching staff. That was our team really stepping up and saying, you know what, we're going to take this in a different direction, you know, come hell or high water. And then you get out on the ice with the Russians. I mean, Colgate was like a well-oiled machine at that point. We got out there, it was like, okay, good, yeah, let's do this. And we found a way. And so from that point on, it was like, you know what, it's all about the development of, yes, the skill and the team. Let's be patient. We knew that taking the fall off would find us, you know, a little under some rust, if you will. But to build those relationships again, a lot of these kids, including a huge incoming class, had been sitting behind a computer for 8 months. They didn't know, you know, the ins and outs of walking into a locker room and from shift to shift being on the bench together again and having the kinds of conversations they needed to have to turn it around. And so I think that we didn't take a day for granted. So I really feel like some of that spirit, some of that silver lining, because we didn't, knock on wood, have any student athletes, you know, get sick from COVID. I can call it a silver lining to say that I'm hoping that some of that carries over.
Great. So now let's transition now into the recruiting conversation.
Yeah.
So, you know, all the student athletes were given a 5th year of eligibility.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about what the impact is on your team with your existing players and then for potential recruits.
Yeah. So interestingly enough, it's that, and then it's an Olympic year. So so there's centralization.
Yes. Yeah, you have one centralized player, if I believe.
We don't actually. We have one Canadian centralized player in Julia Gosling, and we have 2 young women that are going to be representing China in the Olympics. So Anna Segedi and Taylor Lum.
Okay. So,
yeah, we have 3. And so as an example, we have 3 senior student athletes returning. We also have an incoming student athlete from Boston University who is a 5th year using her COVID waiver year. But you see how already that conversation, you know, with regards to numbers and what's important to some programs, every coaching staff is going to have to decide for themselves what is the best way to navigate through the next 4 years of possible 5th year transfers, both inside their locker room and outside their locker room, handling student athletes that have committed to come into a certain class who might be quote unquote pushed back or asked to take an additional year, and just how you handle summers like now where we aren't sure how this is going to play out, and how you speak with these young women, these prospective student athletes starting on June 15th. And every coaching staff will find their sweet spot, what they're comfortable doing, how they're comfortable, you know, working within that 5th year, that additional 5th year opportunity for the student athletes that have it. And I do think there already have been some differences from program to program, league to league. Everybody is doing what they feel is best for their program, best for their student athletes.
So let's divide the recruiting into two parts. Let's start with the players that you can't talk to yet, so that are 2024s and 2025s. What are you guys doing this summer to at least get folks on your radar, and how does that work for you?
Yeah, so this year's really tough. To be perfectly honest, we're watching hockey because, you know, now, thank goodness to technology that's available, working some camps to get ourselves, you know, at least in the same rink facility. But again, we aren't traveling to Canada, you know, as an example. And I, you know, by the time this airs, I might be again. But the idea is that there's going to be a patience involved. And for us, being pensive is important, right?
Gotcha.
And different programs are built differently, right? We had a huge sophomore class right now, which is now going to be our junior class, a huge freshman class. And now we've got a couple small classes. So we're in a different position than a program that might be, you know, trying to replace 8, 9, 10 student athletes in those particular years.
Gotcha.
So for us, probably slowing down, probably making sure that we are, you know, putting our best foot forward with, you know, the student athletes we can't have conversations with, and then of course those within our own rink.
So have you been to any like showcases or events in person?
I have not. Both Chris and Ted have. They've both been on the road, whether it was working the showcase or going to an event. Again, for personal reasons, my husband was moving home from Minnesota, so
sure.
I've been on that end, and then knowing that if the restrictions do stay where they are, that I could end up being the only person in Canada going recruiting.
Gotcha. So when they go to those events, so, you know, like, I don't know if you sent somebody to the Beantown Classic or, okay, so let's just say the Beantown Classic, right? There are 33 teams there, at least for the older age group. How does a coach go and scout that? Do they go and do they have players in mind to look at, or are they in a discovery mode where they're just going and watching games and they're going, okay, who stands out to me?
Probably a bit of both, right? Okay. You're rechecking kids that you had really high on your list before this all happened. And that hasn't changed. Anytime we're going to, you know, I'll talk about the Stony Creek Showcase, because that's something where it was 3 weekends in September that all 3 members of our staff were going at some point. And you're going to check in on the student athletes, prospective student athletes that you've already identified. And then you're also just sitting and watching some really good hockey, especially once it comes to the crossover games. So if you're there for the, you know, to the last minute with, if you're going recruiting with Boomer, you are, you know, at some point you've watched the kids that you've already identified enough, and then your eyes wide open, right? But, you know, I think as good evaluators, you have to be able to do both, you know, write down the mark. And again, communication is so important. So we have so many kids now that we're talking to that want a full report of what we thought of them every weekend that they know we were in the building. Right. So it's not a matter of sitting and waiting.
This is new information for me. So I'm assuming this is after you can talk to a player, right? So you're talking about juniors and seniors. So you will go and you will watch them. And then because you're able to have conversations with them, you are able to provide feedback and an evaluation based on their performance. Is that sometimes what happens?
If they're asking for it, right? Like, does that make me, do you want me to do, you know, you watched me play last weekend, do you want me to visit in August, right? And I think that sometimes that's really unhealthy, right? For a student athlete to be at the Beantown Showcase, for some of those kids, again, less so for the Americans because they got to play in nationals, and, you know, there were a lot of states that found ways to navigate COVID to allow student athletes to have a team experience. But, you know, what ends up being the balance of, I'm going to have fun with my teammates and play the game I love, and I'm worried about who's in the stands watching me play. And I would never want a student athlete to be worried if I was in the stands, ever. Prospective student athlete. Women don't get to play, young women don't get to play the game long enough for that joy to be taken away from them, in my experience. I think that that's something that, unfortunately, college athletics doesn't do a good job of. It's not about us as prospective college. It's your prospective college coach. It is about you as a young woman getting to enjoy being an athlete, playing the game. You know,
but if they are looking to, you know, both get better and understand what it takes to get an offer to play at a school, is that dialogue important of hearing like, hey, these are things we really like about you, but we, you know, these are a couple areas that, you know, you might want to develop?
Yeah, I think that's realistic, right?
Okay.
So, you know, if you have again, when I said earlier in the podcast about like, our school's not for every student athlete and every student athlete's not for our school. So if you as a student athlete are hearing from a coach that there's a list of 17 things that they think you need to work on in order to play at their school, there's a chance that possibly is the school that you're going to want. Yeah. Those are still great. You know, as a college coach, it's my responsibility to talk to every, you know, prospective college student athlete respectfully and to give them insight. I don't have a problem doing that, but I think that's where the communication can be really helpful to understanding, you know, there's a lot of good college hockey programs out there. Are you going to be a good fit for every single one of them? The answer is no. Not even the best, most elite hockey player should be accepting recruitment calls from every school. That waters down their experience as well. Calls, emails, text messages, Zoom calls, whatever method or mode that people are using. So I do think that sometimes having the good hard conversations, it's the same as one of our student athletes walking into, you know, who's at St. Lawrence, walking in and being like, I'd like to be on the power play. What do I need to do? Here's a list of 17 things to do. Right. So we all need to appreciate that, you know, that dialogue is there. And I think that if it's done respectfully on both ends, it's, you know, it's something that can be productive, both for the college coach to be able to learn to have hard conversations. And then on the other end, you know, again, I've just seen it, unfortunately, happen too often where prospective student athletes are no longer enjoying play the game they love because they're not being recruited.
Gotcha. Okay, I got one last recruiting question for you, because this came from a dad who I was speaking to last week, and he wants to know, like, when his daughter goes to one of these showcases, whether it's a tournament or you know, one where coaches actually participate in detail on the ice, how much do you need to see of a player to get to know that, like, okay, that's all I need to see for this player? Is it like a full game? Is it a period? Is it 3 days worth of effort? Like, what's enough for you to go, okay, I got the full picture for where they are today? Obviously, it's going to change. I want to see where they are 6 months from now, a year from now, etc. But for, you know, this summer or this spring, I've seen enough to know I got everything I need to know where they are right now.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's going to be different for every college coach. I'm sorry to tell that dad that that's like the when should I propose to my partner, or, you know, my wife or husband, you know. Everybody's going to be a little different. So I will say, again, depending on, you know, if a college hockey program needs 10 recruits for that next year or 2 years away, their process might be different than a program that needs 2. Yep. Or, you know what I'm saying? Or, you know, if a program got several, you know, commitments on June 15th of Rising Juniors, as opposed to we didn't get any commitments. Now we've got to go and really comb through, you know, the student athletes, prospective student athletes that are still, you know, looking for homes. So every year is going to be different, and every program is going to be different. And again, that's part of that conversation, that, you know, really going into showcases, going into camps with a healthy expectation that you namely should be there to have fun, to make memories, to develop as a player, right? So to sponge, take everything that those college coaches are doing with you on the ice and try to get better at it. Don't just try to show them what you're good at. You know, kids that are great stick handlers sometimes won't want to work on edges on their skates, honestly, because they don't want the coach to know that they're quote unquote not confident in their skating. Just an example. You know, in that order, right? And then let's see what comes out of those showcases.
Okay, I'm gonna drive you a little bit more narrow. Okay, you're at a tournament and you're sitting in the stands, right? And there's 2 players that you're watching in the game that you ahead of time, and then everybody else is, you know, you'll discover. For those 2 players, do you need to watch the full game of them playing, or does it only take 1 or 2 periods for you to get a feel for that?
Okay, so again, interestingly enough, for me, I might only be out on the road for that 1 weekend for that month. Yeah. And so for me, yes, like I'm dialed in, I've got my coffee, my gum for after. I went to the washroom before the game started because I cannot leave my seat, because Boomer is going to expect a full report from me, because I'm not going to the 3 other tournaments and the 1 league game and the 1 practice that he's going to. So every coach is different. If you're talking about a Minnesota coach that can roll out of bed and be at the rink to watch that player play, their evaluation of said player, if they have a bad game, they might be back watching them again the next day, right? Like, let me give them another chance, as opposed to me flying out to Minnesota and I'm watching somebody for the first and the last time that year, right? Like, and again, this is less stressful now because we have Live Barn. We have, it's not you sending me a highlight clip anymore. It's you sending me whole game tapes because, you know, or you don't even send it to me. I just subscribe and, hey, this is two good high school teams. Let's watch that. And I hope then our prospective student athletes have a healthier experience playing, because when they have a bad shift or a bad game, or if, you know, at the corner of the eye, they're seeing my scarlet and brown jacket leave the rink, they're not like, well, she's done with me. She's done with me. You know, I'm not playing good, or I just took that penalty. That's not what it should be about. That, you know, and I hold very true to that. And I hope before I, you know, pick up and leave coaching college hockey, that we can come to that normalcy. And unfortunately, I think it's very much tied in a lot of ways, in the same way as my experience was growing up, to our male counterparts and their relationship with making it to the show, you know, that being ingrained in them so young, as opposed to, this is really beneficial. This is great for the kids. They're having a blast. They're healthy. They're staying out of the trouble. So all of this is to say, for me, as someone who's looking at prospective student athletes, you know, I would love to see women's hockey, women's sport in general, take our cues from ourselves and what's most important to us, right, as females. And again, I'm lucky enough to be on a staff with two people that I love and respect, and I know love and respect to me and gender isn't an issue. So I'm not the only person talking about this in our staff meetings as a woman. They are coaches of women, and so this is important to them as well. You know, I'm not going to be a tactical X's and O's human over, oh my gosh, she's having a blast. You know, I love this kid, you know, look how happy she was for her teammate that just scored, not just how did she celebrate when she scored. You know what I'm saying? Yep. You know, how happy, what did she do after her goalie gave up the goal that ended the game? What was her body language? How was she walking through the lobby after a tough loss? If she throws her bag or hockey bag at her parents, we're probably getting the red pen out. Right, real quick, you know, my iPad opens and I'm making some sort of reference, because it's not behavior that I want to see in a saint. Yeah. The gems, the kids that are going to national camps, super easy to identify, right? We know they're on the list that's been given to us that we should watch, right? Typically right now, I'd be in Western Canada at the U18 tryout for Hockey Canada. Real easy to walk into that rink and be like, okay, you know, what finite skills? Is she a little bit better at this than her, right? Is she a 5 and she's a 4.75, right? But we need more players than that. We need different players than that. You know, the pool has to be going to some of these camps and never having heard of this kid and calling my colleague back at St. Lawrence and saying, do you know this kid from this? Oh yeah, she had a great, oh, she was great in this weekend. Okay, keep an eye on her for us, you know? It can't always be about the blue chip, obvious answer, you know, kid that got 3 hat tricks at U.S. Nationals, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. All right, Mare, thank you so much for this. Let me ask you one last question, just in terms of, you know, what can the players do to get on your radar and show an interest in St. Lawrence, and just so people can learn more about the program?
Yeah, I think most programs now have questionnaires right on the website. So sending in your information, emailing the coaching staff, asking them if they're going to a respective, you know, tournament. If they are, here's my game schedule, here's my number. This is, you know, God bless them if they're like we were back in Lumsden, where you had a different number and a different jersey because one jersey was, you know, somebody didn't turn their jersey the year in before, so you're stuck with, you know. But communicating, right? Making phone calls. I'll always pick up an unknown phone call on my cell phone. I just, well, hey, hi, how are you? You know what? Let me get with Ted and see if we're going to that tournament. We don't have problems. We know how lucky we are to do what it is we do, where we do it, that St. Lawrence is a school that, you know, really in so many ways helps develop these young women in a way that we're so proud of. So we're fine having those conversations, you know, emails are fine, phone calls, you know, take control of your own career and what you want out of your college experience, because there's very few players that can sit back and wait. There's always going to be some of them, but growing up in small town Saskatchewan, you know, that wasn't going to be my path, and that certainly isn't my personality to this day. So I will say, you know, drive the bus certainly if you can, and do your homework on what's really important to you. You know, we have so many kids calling us first to talk about their intended major, and they're my favorite recruiting calls, right? You know, when we start talking about, oh yeah, I'm really good at math and science, and that makes me happy that someone's calling me to talk first about what we have to offer them academically, or what does the residence look like? Where do we live? You know, when the conversation's not just about hockey. We'll always get to that at some point, but it's encouraging when you see these student athletes, prospective student athletes, already looking for a well-rounded experience themselves.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Definitely great to hear your perspective on the kind of looking at the whole athlete, student athlete, and especially on the student side and the having fun side. So I think that was really one of my key takeaways from our conversation. So thank you so much, and best of luck in the fall with the team, and hopefully not having a COVID year, having a regular season in the ECAC.
Yeah, take good care.
I really want to thank Mare for joining me today. It was great to hear about her coaching career, what her process is like when recruiting prospective student athletes, and most importantly, her focus on making sure girls have fun playing hockey. And remember, if you got something out of today's episode, we'd really appreciate it if you'd like, follow, subscribe, and even better if you could leave us a review so we can keep sharing this important hockey information with folks just like you.